Hello there, welcome to Nerd Empire and another Nerd Remembers. Sometimes these are Nerd Recommends, but this case is probably Remembers, because again, it's probably going to be hard to find, but this is an old cartoon series made in 1991. It ran from 1991 through to 1992, and that was James Bond Jr. The animated show was set around the nephew of MI6's greatest spy and super agent, James Bond. Why his nephew was then called James Bond Jr., not entirely sure. But there you go, he has his own version of Q, known as IQ, and he goes on various wacky adventures to solve crimes, defeat international terrorists, save the girl, save the boy, save the school, and generally be an all-round awesome guy. It is 90s cheese and 90s hair at its absolute height. There are 62 episodes of the show in entirety, and it is currently quite hard to locate. The voice of James Bond Jr. was provided by Corey Burton, but the show had a plethora of various other voice actors, of course, because it was a voice acted show, one of which of note was BJ Ward, who was known for doing the voice of Velma Dinkley in The New Adventures of Scooby-Doo. Like any good James Bond, he would have to endure his fair share of battles against the scum of the world, scum being saboteurs and criminals united in mayhem. These were the main antagonists against this James Bond, and although it is notable that he is the nephew of James Bond, it is not in any way considered canonical to the movies. Not that the James Bond movies can really stand to really have any kind of continuous between the movies, really, unless that fan theory that James Bond is a title and not a person, in which case that would actually explain James Bond Jr. He might just be the next Bond in training. Could we be looking at, considering the year, an early Pierce Brosnan, or perhaps even Daniel Craig back when he was a teenager, because the timeline would probably about fit. This is Daniel Craig. Fight me. It could be true. Probably not. Could be though. Of course, it would come with all the gadgets and all the things you would expect, all the trappings of a typical James Bond movie, but centered around a teenage character who's still dealing with all the usual angst and teenage problems that most teenagers have to deal with, like school, pimples, girls, and having a nerdy best friend. I never had to deal with that one. I think I was the nerdy best friend, or I just didn't have friends, because I was too busy sat at home watching cartoons. Hey ho, I can live with that. The show did get cancelled, probably due to lack of ratings, and suffered many of the things that the shows in the early 90s suffered from. It just simply couldn't outcompete all the massive shows, and everyone was looking for the next big thing. It seemed like a slam dunk, the idea just to create a James Bond series, but to make it to appeal to kids, we make it James Bond Jr. We slap Jr. on the end to imply and make everyone aware that it is a young James Bond, but not the James Bond that you know. And although it doesn't shy away from some of the violence, it hasn't. We're in the early 90s yet. We haven't quite reached Batman the Animated Series sort of public consciousness that cartoons can be aimed at an adult. So this show is still aimed at children, and although it certainly had more violence in it than a cartoon which would make today, 2022, when I'm making this video, would have in it, it doesn't really throw its punches. It kind of holds them back. But it was very fun and had a very snappy theme song.
Bond. James Bond Jr. No one can stop him, but scum always tries. Young Bond cuts through each web of spies. He learned the game from his Uncle James. Now he's heir to the name James Bond. James Bond Jr. Look out, he's coming through. He's got a job to do while he rescues the girl. James Bond Jr. chases scum around the world.
And generally was an easy thing to watch as a Saturday morning cartoon, but I do recall when I used to try and watch it, I couldn't really watch it consistently. I don't recall if it was on BBC or ITV, which is Channel 3 for those that are 20 years younger than me and don't know that. Can't really remember. I suspect it was on the BBC, but it seems to be one of them things I can never really find, and I suspect that if I was struggling, bear in mind no friends sat at home watching cartoons, and I was struggling to find it, then that means the people who actually knew what they were looking for and real fans of the show definitely were struggling to find this bloody thing, which may have led to its downfall. It's the same old story, not good enough ratings, we keep moving it around, changing networks, and it just simply fizzled out. As stated, this is not a show that spun off in any way from the continuity of the movies or from the novels. However, there was a 1967 novel which actually did feature a younger James Bond, a James Bond Jr. if you like. It should also be pointed out that as far as we know, and although I've not read them personally, from my research, Bond doesn't have any brothers or sisters in the novels, so this cartoon can't really be spinning off from any of them. The spin-off novel, which was, as I said, was made in 1967, The Adventures of James Bond Jr. 003 and a half, although it was a spin-off novel, it again is not really considered canon, but maybe correct me on that. Where the James Bond novels are concerned, I'm hardly an expert, so feel free to correct me. I might be wrong on that one. And that particular nugget of information I got from IMDb, so they're not always the most reliable source, and this is mostly a video about the cartoon, not about the book, so I don't really care, to be honest, but feel free to tell me. As I said, this was an attempt to market a cartoon of James Bond to a younger audience and then have them lead into the more adult James Bond movies as they got older. It didn't really succeed and isn't as well remembered and beloved as a cartoon as you might think. Now, I personally did love it, but I know that a lot of the cartoons I loved as a child, like Prince Valiant and stuff like that, haven't really stood the test of time and have become more of a cult niche in the industry. But this is one that I do have fond memories of, despite the sort of ridiculous concepts that it had to endure. It's like any Bond. It's over the top, it's insane, it's ridiculous, but it is enjoyable. And if you can find it, and remember that danger lurks behind every corner when trying to find this. That makes no sense, but that was a catchphrase in the show. I couldn't even figure out how to work it in. It is what it is. Let's move on. Go find it. Go give it a watch. Your call. If you've seen it, let me know what you remember about it. I remember getting a great deal of joy out of watching this thing, but you might remember different. You might be amongst those people that hated it. And then again, finding every episode was difficult, and it was a effort. But if you could, it was worth it. And that is the end of this video. I just want to take this moment to thank you for watching that video. If you liked what you saw, please check out my social links in the description box below to Instagram and Twitter and others, and also is down there a link to my Patreon page where you can support this channel and the others as I try to grow this franchise and do this more regularly. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.